What I'm about to say may offend some people. What I'm about to say may upset some people. What I'm about to say is not a political statement. What I am going to say is about discrimination. The practice of treating people less fairly because of their race, sex, religion, or for any other reason. What I'm going to say is about discriminating people because of a pigment in their skin called eumelanin. I remember in grade prep, I'd come out of the school grounds and I was holding some pipe cleaners. And as I got outside the gate, one of the kids pointed to his mum and said, "That's him, Mum." The mother came over, pushed me over, took the pipe cleaners out of my hand and said to me, "Don't you ever go near my son, you little black shit." I remember looking up and looking at the other parents, and nobody did anything. I got up and I ran home crying, fearful that this lady would follow me in her car. I was 5 years old. I remember in grade 2 at another primary school when 3 grade 6 boys held me down, opened my mouth and spat in it and laughed at the other black kid, knowing that the other black kids that they were talking about were my sisters and brother. I remember thinking to myself, one day I'll find one of those bullies. 20 years later, I did. He wasn't as big as I remembered, and I wasn't as small as he remembered. But the fear in his eyes was enough for me. I remember talking to somebody not long ago about growing up in the inner suburbs of Melbourne and reminiscing about riding our BMX bikes, pretending we were BMX bandits. And I said to him, "Remember how the police used to pull us over and ask us, 'Where do you live? And is that your bike?' And he said, 'No, I was never pulled over.' He asked me how many times it happened, and I couldn't count. From the age of 9 through to 13, I remember my niece asking my mum, her grandmother, as she watched TV and saw TV presenter Indira Naidu, and saying to her, 'Grandma, can we do those things?' as she pointed to her skin. She was 8. It's like when I walk into the shops with my wife. The shopkeeper will say to me, 'Are you alright?' My reply, 'I'm fine, thank you.' And then they turn to my wife and they say to her, 'Hi, how are you? How can I help you?' Her response, 'I'm with him.' Well, a couple of years ago when I moved to Greensborough and I pulled up next to a car and the lady abused me for parking too close to her. And her words were, 'Go back to where you came from. Go back to where you were born.' And as I got out of the car, she said to me, 'Where were you even born?' And I told her, 'Cotham Road, Kew.' Or another time when I was at Coles and I had a shopping trolley full of sausages, bacon and eggs. And a lady muttered under her breath, 'You bloody freeloaders.' I looked at her and she said, 'Yeah, you come to our country and you freeload and you take everything. What have you done for this country?' So I said to her, 'I employ over 200 Australians. My father, for several decades, worked in pastoral care, serving hundreds of Australians. My sister represented Australia in sport, held her hand to her chest and sang the national anthem for Australia. My younger sister, nurse, caring for Australians, a palliative care nurse in their last hours. My mum worked for Qantas. And the sausages, eggs and bacons that you see in the trolley, they're for Anzac Day, for a breakfast, after a service that we have at a club that I'm the president for, where players at that club went to war to fight for Australia and never made it home. And I said to her, what have you done for my country? Or when my late father was in hospital and the nurses came in and they started speaking around him as if he couldn't speak English. And they didn't engage him. And then finally one nurse looked at him and said, Mr. Latu, how are you? He said, I'm not deaf, nor am I dumb. They didn't realise that he'd been providing pastoral care in that hospital for years. Or the time when my car broke down, my wife and I were driving. She was pregnant with our first child and pregnant with hyperemesis gravidarum, HG, which basically made her vomit 30 times a day. So we pulled over into a street in Templestowe. She started to vomit in the passenger seat. I looked up and I saw a lady in her front yard staring at me. She then locked her gate, told her kids to go inside. Moments later she came back out with her phone, filming me. She put her kids and her husband in the car and they drove off. They made their way towards me and my wife, and as they came past, her husband was shaking his head while she was filming. I thought when they drove past they may have seen my wife in the passenger seat vomiting. And I looked in the rear vision mirror and they did a U-turn. They came back and I thought they were going to come and ask for help. But she got out of her car and she took a photo of my registration plate and drove off. Or the time when I was dropping my car off to the mechanic, and as I was waiting at the front for a taxi, somebody drove past yelling, "You effing black dog." Even so much so that the mechanic came out and said, "Did you know that person?" I didn't. Or amidst the COVID, when I was in Coles, and a Chinese lady came to me and asked if she could stand next to me because she had just been abused by a couple in the aisle saying, "If you didn't come here with your diseases, we wouldn't have this problem." Or just the other day, watching the rallies in the United States and in San Francisco, realising that at that rally stood my cousin and her 3 kids, her youngest an 11-year-old, and her teaching him that when the police come, just be compliant, because they can't have you dead. 11 years old. I thought I had it bad, trying to be a BMX bandit. He has to make sure he's not shot. I'm not even going to start about how many times I heard it while playing rugby. Some from on the field, but of a lot of it from off the field. I didn't know much of this had affected me. I actually didn't think it was any indifferent to anybody else until I married my wife. And she started to teach me that the way that people treat me sometimes is very different from the way they treat her. I speak out now also because I have 2 girls. And for them, they're going to face the same prejudice that I have because of the colour of their skin. Last year, my 3-year-old daughter experienced it firsthand. I'd taken them to a fair, and there was a balloon artist, and he was making swords for the boys, purple, and pink poodles for the girls. My 3-year-old asked if she could line up, and I said she could. So I stood back holding the pram with my 1-year-old, and I watched her line up, and as she got closer to the front, she kept looking back at me. And I looked at her, encouraging her. She got to the front. The balloon artist looked around and asked, "Are there any more kids?" She was the only one in the line. He then started to make some more balloons. He took one, reached over the top of her head, and gave it to a girl behind her who just arrived. The mother said, no, she was there first. The balloon artist said, no, it's fine. Without looking at her, he pulled out 2 black balloons and made a flower. He gave it to my daughter and gestured to her to move away. My daughter came to me, she looked at me confused and said to me, Daddy, what's this? And I told her, that is the most beautiful black flower. And not everybody gets one. But take that and enjoy it. She ran off and I was approached by a couple of the parents. One who told her daughter to offer up her poodle, and I said it's fine. Another who came and said that they're going to make a complaint. Me, if I was to do what I thought, and grab him by the neck and throw him over the fence, then who becomes the aggressor? The fact that other people stood up and challenged him was enough for me. I can't stand in front of my daughters and fight the prejudice, because that's going to last longer than I will. The prejudice because of the colour of their skin, the prejudice because of their gender. But all that we can do is educate, empower, and be there standing to support them through the challenge. If you don't think that we have prejudice in this country, have a look at this. General Certificate of Exemption for Joseph Edwards. This document entitles Joseph Edwards to leave the reservation or mission at which he lives to go to work. The additional benefits include to walk freely through the town without being arrested. Note, curfews apply. He may enter a shop or a hotel, but he may not be served at the proprietor's discretion. Special conditions apply. In order to gain this exemption certificate, the following must be strictly adhered to. Speaking in native language, prohibited. Engaging in dance rituals, native customs, prohibited. Associating with fellow Indigenous people, including family, prohibited. Assimilate into the wider community. If all conditions are met with and satisfactorily upheld, you may also be eligible to live in town unsupervised. Note, strictly segregated housing areas. This is your chance to be free of the Aboriginals Protection Act and to live like a white man. 1951. I am not Aboriginal, but why should I not stand up for their rights? I am not Asian or Indian, but why should I not stand up for their rights? I am not female, but why should I not stand up for their rights? First impressions matter. And for some people, when they see someone like me, the first impression is what I have to fight. I say hello before they say hello to show that I'm kind. I am polite to show that I'm not aggressive. If I fight, it's what people expect me to do. So, I need to make sure that I can articulate so that people can't call me dumb. So that I can be kind so people can't say, see, he's rude. I don't share these stories for sympathy. I share these stories to educate. These are only not even a handful of the stories that I can continue to tell you. The other day, I printed a t-shirt saying I can't breathe. And what that means to me is, to live, we need oxygen. For anybody to take away something that stops us from living our fullest life, that's not right. I wore that t-shirt the other day, and I wear it because it challenges people. Some people shook their heads in disgust, while others congratulated and smiled. I am privileged to live in this beautiful country, my country. I am privileged to be around good people. Sometimes it's easier to be silent than to stand up for what is wrong. If you feel the need to fight, don't fight each other. Fight for mankind. We can do better. We can be better. Prejudice is learnt behaviour. And that all starts from home.
No matter where you go in your life, at some point you're going to need somebody to stand by you. Oh yeah, oh my darling, stand by me. No, I won't be afraid. No, I won't shed one tear, just as long as your people